Gentle reader, welcome to Everything is Everything. You have reached that unusual point in the show where we pivot from being on the same page in terms of what we are talking about. Today, Ajay wants to talk about one thing. I'm going to insist on talking about something else. He's going to take you through, the Indian business landscape, what our market is like, and look ahead in the next 20 years. What can firms do? All of those. Terribly exciting, isn't it? I'm going to talk about the boring subject of Bollywood. That's what I'm going to do.
So I have no idea how you're going to do it. Shall we start?
Let us start, and I want to start with a clip that actually features a hero who looks just like Ajay in this clip. So I want all of you to imagine, and if you have access to good AI, you can even make that clip. But imagine Ajay is a person instead of Shah Rukh Khan who is jumping around and singing. Let's go.
Tell me, Amit, where does this fit in our story for today?
This fits in our story because this clip, written by the great lyricist Zafar Gorakhpuri, a great philosopher, and I'm saying this only on the basis of these words, holds an important lesson for all of us, where basically what is being discussed in this magnificent dissertation couched in a song is the notion of bookish knowledge and real knowledge. And the point being made here is that, and something I know you would agree with, that bookish knowledge is irrelevant, credentialism is nonsense, local knowledge matters, right? And that I know is very much something that you're also going to be talking about in the context of firms.
Okay, so can I start at the deep history?
Let's go.
So I'm going to tell a story about the bad old days of Indian firms, then a great revolution that took place. Roughly speaking, that was the engine of the growth of the Indian economy in the 90s and 2000s. And then I'm going to complain about that new world and think about the future. Okay, so let's start at the bad old days. In the bad old days, you could build a big national firm, a firm that operated all over India. But really, the operational controls were very weak. Okay, so I always like to remind everybody that Robert Clive did his own thing because there was no email. Okay, so it was like that. You thought that you're a national firm, but there were operations and branch leaders and branch managers doing things all over the country. And they had to be empowered because there was no way they could check back with HQ. And they had considerable discretion in what they did. Okay? And this created a great deal of sloppiness in process also, because then different people would be idiosyncratic, they do their own thing, there would be a lack of process clarity on what does this firm stand for, what product or service does the firm try to produce. There would be petty corruption. Okay? And in my mind, the single vision that I want you to think about that exemplifies that era is the scene of a customer arguing with a Indian Airlines frontline employee. Earnestly, sincerely arguing with an Indian Airlines frontline employee. Because you know what? Actually, the frontline employees of Indian Airlines had a lot of discretion. They could do many things. They were seriously powerful people. And so it was efficient for you and me to try to fervently persuade an Indian Airlines frontline employee saying, do something for me. Or similarly, think of the conversation between a customer and a branch manager. Okay, the teller, right? Is that what it's called? Yeah, the teller in the bank branch was reasonably disempowered. They had little discretion. But the branch manager was like a demigod. The branch manager had serious discretion. There were all kinds of genuine, important decisions that a branch manager could make. It made them powerful people. It made it worth your while arguing with them. Okay? So the picture I want to paint is, you may think you're a national firm with operations all over India, but in the absence of control, actually at local operations all over the country, there was give. And frontline staff made decisions on their own. They thought about things for themselves, and in many ways evolved the offering in ways that made sense, and also engaged in their own petty biases and local corruption. Okay, so this is the first epoch of the Indian firm, which runs all the way till the emergence of modern computer technology.
It's a magnificent story, and it also answers a question for me that I had the other day and that I've had before. I was working at Starbucks, and a table away, somebody was arguing with Amazon customer care. And at one point, she got exasperated and said, "I will never buy anything from your company again." And I was just thinking, this guy is a call center worker. He can't even help you. Like, don't even be rude to him. There's no point. He's got a script, he's doing his shit, he can't even help you. But this kind of explains why that habit would have been there. And and I get it both as a feature and the bug. Like, of course, what the film Baazigar tells us about is the importance of local knowledge, and every firm knows this. That if you are in Patiala and if you are in Patna, it makes a material difference to the approach that you take with your customer, and it is rational for any branch manager at one of those companies to tailor his approach to who the customer is and to what will work locally and what will not work locally. But there are big downsides to this also, right? So tell me a little bit about that.
So the downsides become two things. One is just sheer process failure. So it's a bit like the way Land Pritchett describes the Indian state, that there is a brain, but the nerves have been severed and the fingers are doing their own thing. Okay, so then every large firm just became a coalition of various individuals doing their own thing, and you lose the ability to have a strategy, because the brain may think we're doing X, but the frontline staff may think differently and they may do their own thing. Okay, and that did lead to significant difficulties in terms of risk, in terms of local corruption, and it had its own problems. I'm not here to venerate that world, I'm here to describe it. And we have forgotten these things. We think about them as prehistory. I want to bring it back, and I want to come back into this as we tell the story today.
So, you mentioned the big brain at the top and the local manager who really kind of doesn't get it. And we have a Bollywood film that captures exactly this. Have you heard of Gangs of Wasipur? Here we go.
खेत में जाओ, थोड़ा मोटिवेशन दो लोगों को। और कल रात वहां थे,
सिनेमा देखने गए थे।
कौन सा सिनेमा?
दिलवाले दुल्हनिया ले जाएंगे।
बेटा, तुमसे ना हो पाएगा। हमें तुम्हारे लक्षण बिल्कुल ठीक नहीं लग रहा है, तुमसे ना हो पाएगा।
Amit, that is 2 videos already, and I ain't even got started. I can't believe you have so many.
Let me tell you something, Ajay Shah. I ain't even got started, all right? I have another video for you which is going to presage what you're going to talk about next, right? So let's do it.
But I'm a captain of a state team.
And I'm the coach of the Indian national women's team. मुझे स्टेट्स के नाम ना सुनाई देते हैं, ना दिखाई देते हैं। सिर्फ एक मुल्क का नाम सुनाई देता है, इंडिया।
Yeah, so that's exactly the idea of the great development of the Indian firm, which began in the 90s. Okay, so from the 90s, we started getting computers, and more importantly, we started getting telecom. Okay, so the early VSAT type implementations started in the late 90s, and in the 2000s, we started getting serious internet connectivity, and by and large, all the big firms of the country managed to wire up their operations by using telecom and computers. Okay, and with this, for the first time, we got the emergence of the big national firms in a meaningful way, that these firms had centralized information, centralized design of processes, operational controls, whereby blow by blow they could see what was happening in the transaction, and then they would trigger off operational audit to verify that the frontline bloke was not actually doing a different transaction stored in a notebook or a spreadsheet while portraying a different transaction in the IT system. Okay, so the great centralization, the centralizing power of IT systems and telecom systems came up. Now Robert Clive was not far away being a loose cannon without email. Now Robert Clive was under the daily misery of surveillance from HQ. Okay, and HQ could pull up Robert Clive and make sure that he operated as per instructions. Okay? And this gave the emergence of the true national firm. And in my mind, this is one of the singular great developments of the Indian economy. This is the heart, the engine of how sophisticated scale and productivity emerged in Indian capitalism. So when we think of the great GDP explosion from 1991 to 2011, this is an important piece that was going on there. Firms got size, firms got operational controls, firms got more sophisticated in their processes, and that all this is a part of productivity growth. Okay, so this was a huge development and it's a very important milestone, and I feel not enough people have remarked on that transition that took place. Okay, so all of us have lived it, we've just stopped noticing it, and I want to pull this out of our consciousness and say that this was big, this was huge. It enabled scale, it enabled formal process design. Then you got the magic of Anderson Consulting, now Accenture, and that capability of course is now all over the Indian landscape. It is, you know, hundreds of firms who know how to think in terms of time and motion studies and the detailed enterprise process engineering, the ERP systems. All this knowledge was rolled out across the firms, and the firms grew scale tremendously, did not add a whole lot of labor, and got higher productivity. Again, that's the story of what was done right in India, and I admire that work, and it was essential to how we got here.
I have a follow-up question, and I'm kind of thinking aloud here. At one level, the story that you've told, which we have all seen, but I have never thought about with this frame, that hey, technology came, it enabled all of this, and obviously all these beautiful things happen. How much of how much of a part did the globalization of ideas play in this? Because when we are talking about business processes, suddenly there are more business books available. People are going abroad to study and coming back. Ideas are flowing more freely. People will throw around phrases like Six Sigma and etc. etc. I don't even know all the phrases, but there is a lot of that thinking percolating down. And to me, it can sort of move in two directions. And one direction is you have a lot of great ideas and best practices coming in, and that just makes firms more efficient and better in all of these ways. But then there can also be a great homogenizing influence in the sense that everybody is studying the same thing in their MBA course and IIMs or wherever they're going. And it's the same kind of ideas, the same kind of frameworks, and a lot of it is coming from the West, with the danger of what biologists call isomorphic mimicry, applying concepts and principles to to a particular place just because it worked somewhere else. So
Everything you say is correct, except not much because of the IIMs, but the practices of global firms percolated into India. I want to describe the barriers of the 90s like this, that there was a huge telecom barrier. Okay, all the way into the 90s, Indian telecom was just a pure nightmare. And I know so many thinking people in the world of Indian business who were fully charged and ready to go to build better businesses in India. But the choke point was the inadequacy of telecom, meaning either it was just unavailable or the prices were outright crazy. You're also absolutely right in that the practices of many firms flowed globally. So, for example, banking. Okay, there was a well understood template of what is a well run bank abroad, and gradually those practices came into India, intermediated by foreign banks, intermediated by people who had worked in foreign banks. These were very much the knowledge flows that happened. But there was this sort of pent up historical baggage which had to be overcome, which is, in India normally we were poor, we didn't have money, firms were poor, and they couldn't afford the computers, they couldn't afford the telecom. And so when in the 90s and 2000s the trade barriers came down, the prices of computers crashed, and the telecom became available through the reforms of the Vajpayee years. Sudhindra Kulkarni and K. Singh did amazing things and basically blew up the death grip of the Department of Telecom on Indian telecom. And suddenly there was a bounty of cheap, ubiquitous connectivity all around the country. And all these things came together. And basically it absorbed the management capability of one generation to take this bounty and build large, complex national firms. Okay, so far I'm telling this as a positive story, but then you immediately come to the difficulties. The difficulties that came with this world was this excessive centralization. firms started getting drugged on the conception in their own minds that there is one firm, there is one list of products and services, there is one process design which will now be rolled out all across India. There was like this flattening of the richness and complexity of India. And while that was a good thing to do at that time, with the benefit of hindsight, we see that actually this is a serious problem. This is a serious choke point. India is very, very diverse. Okay, so let me dwell on the complexity and the richness of what happens in India. For me, one great learning experience has been the CMIE household data. And as part of that journey, Mahesh Vyas, CMIE, did a very nice and important intellectual abstraction. They proposed that we should think of India as about 100 homogeneous regions. Okay, so there are about 700 districts in India. So think that there are about 7 districts per homogeneous region. And they devised an algorithm for choosing 7 physically contiguous districts, basically for choosing a group of districts that are physically contiguous, that lie within one state, so it never crosses from one state to another, which have similar values of women's literacy and which have a similar agroclimatic zone. Okay, so this was the algorithm they proposed, and it may sound odd at first blush, but it's now been more than 10 years, and today I'm a great enthusiast of this way of thinking. I don't think of India as one giant monolith. Don't even think of India as a bunch of states, because the state boundaries are kind of random. Like, really, should UP be one state? Okay, it makes no sense. The correct unit of abstraction is about 100 blocks. So, you think India is 140 crore people, so it's about 1.4 crore people per homogeneous region. It's about 14 million people per homogeneous region, on average 7 districts. And this turns out to be a great map. It really gives you an insight into India, and it opens your eyes to the richness and diversity of the country. So I want to give you one simple example. Kerala turns out to be 3 homogeneous regions. There's North Kerala, there's Central Kerala, and there's South Kerala. Okay, and I've had the opportunity to discuss this with many people, and their argument is, you know what, this makes sense, that Kerala is actually quite diverse. The north is different from the middle, is different from the south in interesting and important ways. But 3 is the correct level of abstraction. Then you don't want to go to 10. 3 is good and useful, that it's quite intellectually useful to use this model, this simplification. But Kerala is about 3 pieces, and you should think about them differently. And it's a useful thing to remind yourself that North Kerala is different from Central Kerala, is different from South Kerala, okay, and so on. So they've done the work of cutting up India into 100 homogeneous regions and creating a whole bunch of data about these homogeneous regions through the household survey. And that to me was an eye-opener, because I started seeing the stark levels of diversity within the country. So let me rattle off some statistics. This was homework done for the decentralization chapter of the Kelkar and Shah book. Okay, so I walk through the 100 regions. I find the highest income and the lowest income. Okay, and it turns out the ratio between the two is about 5.5 or something, 5.3. Okay, so the richest homogeneous region in India is about 5x richer than the poorest homogeneous region of India. Okay, it's a nice number to know that you're dealing with about a 5x variation in income. And then of course there are many other statistics where the variation is higher and lower and so on. And for me, one fact that memorably stuck in my head is the fraction of females that have a mobile phone. Okay, so just think about it. This is a very interesting measure. What fraction of the females in a homogeneous region own a mobile phone? Okay, now that gets you to older women. You'd expect everybody has a phone or not. Like, imagine how bad a household would be that the women don't have a phone even when they are older. And then think about girls, think about teenagers, think about social progressivity, that more modern households will be more ready to give a young girl a mobile phone. Okay, all these things come together in this measure. And it turns out that the highest values in India are like 18 times higher than the lowest values in India. Okay, that's huge levels of variation. Okay, so I just want to say that India is very diverse. India is more diverse than Africa. India is more diverse than Europe. You think of Europe as a continent, you think of Africa as a continent. Lan Pritchett once said to me that by some measures that he has worked with, he thinks that if you merge Latin America and Africa, the ratio between the top and the bottom is smaller than the ratio between the top and the bottom in India. So he says India is more diverse than reversing geological drift and reunifying Latin America and Africa. Okay, that's how diverse India is. Now, in that environment of diversity, we should worry about a homogeneous firm. That do you really want to be one single national firm that will have the fixed product or process that you will roll out all across the country? Okay, does this make sense? Is this wise? And I think it's not wise. And let's come at it from many points of view. Okay, so let me tell a series of stories. Okay, so first, it was an eye-opener for me that when you travel all over the world, you buy what apparently looks like the same Maggi noodles, but they all taste different. Okay, think about it. You go to Indonesia and you buy the humble Maggi noodles. It tastes different from the Maggi noodles of India. It tastes different from the Maggi noodles of the UK. What's going on? I mean, Nestle is a global firm. Of course, they want to make money selling more Maggi noodles, but they recognize that the tastes of Thailand are different from the tastes in India. So they use the focus groups, they do the R&D, and they develop the product from scratch, and they solve the optimization of what is the right flavor of Maggi noodles to sell in Thailand versus Indonesia versus India. Okay, that's nice. Okay, so and whenever people travel abroad, you gentle reader, may I suggest, buy Maggi noodles from every country in the world. It's great fun. Buy Kit Kats from every country in the world. It's very interesting because the Kit Kat is different everywhere. The original British Kit Kat is perfect. Kit Kats in Japan are magical. Kit Kats in America are horrible. Okay, and so on, because that's the taste of the customer. And a corporation just has to be loyal to the customers, and it has to obey whatever are the preferences of the customers. So you have to keep varying the product to reflect that locale. And then I started thinking, wouldn't you do that in India? Okay, that India is so vast, India is so diverse. Like, really, would Tamilians and Punjabis eat the same Maggi noodles? Would Bengalis and Punjabis eat the same Kit Kat? Maybe not. These are large enough markets by head count, by population, surely they are. As India starts becoming prosperous, it starts approaching a GDP and a market size comparable to becoming like an Indonesia, becoming like a Thailand, then it becomes worth the while of the corporation to start saying that I don't want to sell one single Maggi noodles for the whole country, but I will start thinking about the country in more differentiated ways and optimize the product. Maybe you'll first just start saying North and South, and maybe then you'll start saying Tamil Nadu. Maybe you'll ultimately say homogeneous region within Tamil Nadu. Okay, how detailed to go is a business strategy question, but I just want to open this question that why would you think I will sell the same Maggi noodles in the whole country? Why will you think that my software that makes the decision on whether or not to give a home loan will have the identical algorithm in every corner of the country? That really seems preposterous given the amount of diversity of India.
Magnificent narrative, and I often say that India inhabits three centuries at the same time: 19th, 20th, 21st. But now I add a fourth to that list because your mind is in the 22nd century, Ajay Shah, and you're actually probably going to reach there. If you live till 120, do you get there? Not quite. I mean, a little longer.
No. I'm
But
talking about the next 20 years.
agreed.
I'm not
And
that far-sighted.
so I'm kind of fascinated by how this narrative shifts from firstly firms being completely local because they have to be, right? And the pros and cons of that. And then you have systems in place and technology enables a centralization of vision and, better accountability perhaps, and et cetera, et cetera. And then you do a full circle and you come back to recognizing how beautifully diverse we are and therefore how local we kind of need to be. And on this note, Ajay Shah, because do not think that you are just going to talk economics, no break for the viewers. On this note, let us have another great song. And gentle readers, I would ask you to imagine Ajay in this song as well, singing this particular song. Have you ever won a Ghagra?
पतली कमर मटका के नागिन सी बल खा के नैन से नैन लड़ा के दानी चुनर सरगा के हो दिल वालों के दिल का करार लूटने मैं आई हूँ यूपी बिहार लूटने.
So yeah, I know you're speaking about a little more hyper localization than that, and not quite UP Bihar, but it's why not? It's a step in the right direction. I have a couple of questions for you, and one of the questions is that I think the danger of when you mention multiple Maggies, one Maggie for the Tamil taste, one Maggie for the Punjabi taste, and all that. I think what often happens is that a lot of these homogenized mini communities are not necessarily in the same geographical place. Like Tamils with the Tamil taste are spread out everywhere, ditto Bengalis, etc., etc. So when you're thinking localization, you could be catering to a particular sliver of taste, which is, however, spread out geographically throughout. So I would imagine that an ideal way for a company, for a Nestle, it is pretty easy because they can make 30 flavors of Maggie, but have those 30 flavors available everywhere. And then your local shopkeeper decides what to store on a local knowledge. Is that the case?
It is definitely a problem. So I mentioned Kit Kat. Okay, there are Kit Kat aficionados all over the world who revere the British Kit Kat and really don't like the American Kit Kat. Now, if you're living in America, you're stuck. Like you will get a bad, sweet, sugar-loaded Kit Kat in America because that's what Hershey's pushes in America. But if you are traveling to the UK, you will buy a bag full of Kit Kat to take back with you. Or, of course, the Japanese Kit Kat is legendary. They are at a wholly different level. They have all kinds of novel things happening in Japan, and travelers to Japan will always buy Kit Kat there. So just like the Tamilian gets podi when they visit Chennai in the future, they will also buy bagfuls of Maggi noodles and take them back to Delhi.
Urban Platter in Mumbai gives good podi. So my other question is this, that actually I'm not sure what to make of what you say about 102 homogeneous regions, because whatever the population of India is, what, 1.7 billion? 1.4 billion? I would say that there are 1.4 billion homogeneous regions in a sense. And what I see a lot of companies already doing because of technology is they are catering to me, which is the most local that you can get. They are catering to me at a specific point in time. My Amazon algorithm does not show me what somebody in Maharashtra or Mumbai or
Just to
Andheri
clarify,
wants.
I'm claiming that very algorithm can be customized. That could it be that the Amazon algorithm for Japan is different from the Amazon algorithm for India? Okay, I don't know the answer.
No,
I'm just hypothesizing.
I know the answer. The Amazon algorithm is optimizing not for Japan or India, but for the individual.
Amit, I'm saying the underlying code. The very system that optimizes for the individual in India could be different from the system that is optimized for the data in Japan. So remember, somebody is estimating a model, and that very model can have different levels of abstraction. So I don't have the answer.
In the context of Amazon, I don't think so. In the context of a Nestle or another different company, I agree that you cannot customize for every individual, and so you have an algorithm for each country or each region based on the thing. But eventually, don't we want to get to a place where every individual is being optimized for, and eventually want the technology take us
There'll
there?
always be pooling of certain individuals in a data set that is used to fit a model. And I'm just opening our eyes that maybe the data set is not the world but India. Maybe the data set is not India but South India. Maybe the data set is not South India but Tamil Nadu. Maybe the data set is not Tamil Nadu but one homogeneous region. These are trade-offs. These are pragmatic choices that firms should make. I'm trying to make us self-aware that we have run into one powerful concept of a firm, which is an all-India national firm. The models are estimated on an all-India scale. And that's the nature of the firm in India today. And I'm trying to open that box and saying, could it be that we could do things differently?
I think this is a sign of how much of my life I live online, because all the online offerings that I'm thinking of actually cater perfectly only to me. It doesn't matter where I am, whether I'm in Andheri or Tokyo, but they do that. But in the real world, I accept that that is obviously not the case. So Nestle cannot make
I just want
1.4
to
billion
belabor.
Maggie flavors.
Imagine a credit card default prediction model, which is the engine inside every financial firm that issues a credit card. What data set goes into fitting that model is essential for then making a prediction for a customer of one. But you can't make a prediction for a customer of one with a data set of one. So there will always be a certain amount of optimal pooling. And I'm just
No,
opening
I
that
am
box.
agreeing with you. I'm saying there's a particular category like an Amazon or a YouTube where you can cater for a customer, which is one person. But let me finish. Where I'm agreeing with you is, I think in the real world and in a lot of other products like credit cards, that is not possible. You have to take those proxies as groups of population. But again, in the context of credit card, interesting you should mention that. I did an episode with our mutual friend Rahul Mathan, and one of his books, and we also spoke about it in the episode, speaks about how even for credit card, they are using big data to customize for an individual. For example, your credit worthiness can actually be assessed by whether you type in all caps or not, the probability of your typing in all caps, or what is the average charge on your battery, on your phone. Are you the kind of person who keeps it close to 100% and gets paranoid, or do you let it get to 4%, 3% before dying out? And all of these play in unpredictable ways. So I'm not disagreeing with you there. I'm saying in some products we are already there. Like Amazon, 100%, we are already there. My YouTube feed is mine alone, you know.
So
So
Amit, once again, I want to belabor the distinction between a product where a model makes predictions that are customized for one.
I am agreeing with you, Ajay,
But it depends on a data set. And I'm on being inside the firm and wondering what is the appropriate data set. That if farmers kill themselves in Marathwada, then that shapes my thinking about the model for Marathwada differently. Okay, so the data set that goes into the estimation of the model, which will ultimately make a customized prediction of one. But the choice of what is the homogeneous group around which we should estimate these models is the decision box. And I'm saying let's not be fixed to thinking one India for the estimation of these models. Let's be open to the conception that there are many, many Indias.
no, wise words, and I agree with you. All I'm saying is that a farmer in Marathwada who opens YouTube today will get an algorithm eventually, when he uses it enough, customized only to him with no assumptions about Marathwada thrown in. You might begin with your first page, the very first time you open it, might be localized to Maharashtra or whatever. But after that, within a couple of weeks, it is his alone. And that's only there for some products. Obviously, it's not there for other things. So here's my next question to you, that if a corporation today is suddenly to think that, oh shit, this is true, that we have a homogenized way of looking at this country and we need to go deeper and we need to go beyond even UP Bihar, as it were, uh, you know, what are, how does a company change its structure, its design, its ways of functioning to actually get to that level where they can optimize for that?
So the answers are actually not that hard. They're deeply linked to thinking seriously about globalization. So for starters, imagine that you were a company not operating only in India, but you were also operating in 20 countries. Then immediately these questions would be thrust in front of you. You can't just take your product, process, service and roll it out in other countries. Okay, and a great example is the European Union. Poland is different from France, and every global corporation knows that. So all the offerings of complex global corporations have this centralized and decentralized combination where you do some things differently for Poland and you do some things differently for France. And this is something that is well understood. So actually we can borrow a lot of that knowledge and doctrine and bring it into India. And what it boils down to is that there should be a core that's like a headquarters, which is more a strategy and a capital allocation, governance, a board, and an HR piece. And then it's a federated, decentralized architecture where there are many, many business groups operating all over the country who have fair flexibility, who are in charge of a P&L, saying you are there to conquer UP Bihar, and how you do it, there is considerable give. There is considerable freedom and flexibility for like a mini CEO in UP Bihar. So at one caricature, again, there is a global corporation where Casio says, this is my watch, hell with you, I'm just selling this watch. I'm not changing the product. I'll just change my local advertising campaign and my distribution strategy and which panwala will sell Casio watches and so on. But beyond that, the product doesn't change much. All the way to greater and greater levels of decentralization and empowerment, where the process, the product, the service is increasingly made flexible, that it's not a locked in rigid system, but it's a more and more flexible system. And these are the trade-offs that the managers of the world are going to need to address in making progress in India in coming years.
We have done an earlier episode, a very popular one, on how firms evolved over a period of time. And I'll ask you here to kind of look ahead in these new realities, because the world will get more and more diverse in certain ways and will cater to smaller and smaller groups of people. And I wonder how that affects the design of the firm. Like, you and I believe that societies and great large countries cannot be run from the top down. There is spontaneous order, bottom up works, and how you put those incentives in place becomes key. The price system is an important part of that. We've spoken about that. And about firms, I always thought that they're relatively so much smaller than, say, a society or a country, that you can run it from the top down, have processes in place, build safeguards, build accountability, but it is possible. But I wonder, as large companies get to scale, and when you're dealing with the kind of diversity that is here, do we need to be innovative in terms of thinking about the structure of a company? Does it need to be like this? How much can you empower people? How much can you sort of mimic those other bottom-up processes that work so well in society?
Yeah. The boundary of the firm is a great subject of debate. Okay, so long ago, the great economist Ronald Coase was the first one to open up this question. He said, how come inside a firm we seem to run some Stalinist centralization, but outside the firm we live the world of contracts and flexibility of prices? And he was the first one to pose that question, and that guides us on the notions of what is the optimal boundary of the firm. But now in the modern world, increasingly, we are also able to open up the internals of the firm and say, do you really need to be that Stalinist? Do you need to have so much control inside the firm? Can there be more give? Can there be more flexibility? Here are some pieces of how this story can evolve. One thought that I have is that the big national firms are proud and confident and optimistic, and they have trillion rupee market capitalizations, but I feel that they've only scratched the surface of the Indian market. So intuitively, if you're a firm that serves a customer with a household income from rupees 20,000 to rupees 40,000, now in every homogeneous region of India, there's a different income distribution, and the firm is serving one chunk of it. The firm is serving another chunk of it. The firm is serving another chunk of it. And large parts of the country are actually not being served. And that is partly the blindness of the firm. Okay, so like we say, seeing like a state, where we talk about the inability of the state to perceive the reality and make correct decisions. In similar fashion, nationwide firms have this problem that they are unable to perceive, they are unable to see the ground reality, that there is local knowledge, there are local people, and they want products and services, and there are optimal ways of operating in that terrain. But the arrogance of the big national firm makes it blind. It makes it difficult for the firm to see that reality. And so each firm is proud and optimistic and confident, but actually it has only scratched the surface because it has failed to go closer. Okay, this has created space for lots and lots of local firms. So smaller local firms like the deeply optimized Rajasthan firm is really playing on the failure of the national firms. The national firms know one thing, they're cookie cutter, they'll roll it out all across the country, and that creates the space for the Rajasthan firm that says, these guys don't know how to do this. Where they can play, they're unstoppable because they have access to the capital of the Indian equity market and overseas, and their cost of capital cannot be matched. Nobody can compete with that capability. But those guys do so little, there is enough left to do for local firms. So I feel that this is the dynamic of what can play out now, that some firms, some of the big national firms, will learn to make their armor more flexible and start decentralizing, will start building an organization structure where there is a strategy, where there are operational controls, if you're a financial firm, you don't want to make a single mistake anywhere in the country on money laundering and countering the financing of terror, but you do want give on what kind of model is used to generate a decision on giving a home loan where local conditions differ, and what constitutes a safe and sound high ROE loan can vary by location, and people inside that region should shoulder the P&L, and they should have the right incentives to compete for capital from the HQ. So the HQ will be the treasury, and the various sub firms all over India should be in an auction where they ask for capital and then they use it efficiently, and they have the objective of producing ROE. They are in competition with each other in producing ROE, but they have flexibility to evolve their process and change the way their operations work in region by region. And then we can debate what are the optimal regions. Maybe you want to think of India as 5 regions. Maybe you want to think of India as 20 regions. Maybe you want to think of India as 100 homogeneous regions. These are practical choices to be made based on the size and complexity and the management capability of the firm versus the level of heterogeneity that the firm faces. This is hard. This is difficult. It is easy to be a simple Stalinist centralized firm rolling out everything all across the country. This is much more complicated, where there is a center and there is a periphery, and the periphery has give, and yet you want operational controls on periphery so that it doesn't turn into violating laws or corruption, and yet you extract better ROE from each region of the country.
In a past episode, we spoke about vicious circles and virtuous cycles, and I'm thinking that here, one at a narrow level, if you look at it, there is a vicious cycle where there is a particular model of a company, the Stalinist model, like you said, and that perpetuates itself because it's normalized and nobody knows anything else. But equally, I think there is a virtuous cycle possible where the incentives of the marketplace rewards those who are most flexible with the structure and play around with it, and then eventually, in the long run, over a long period of time, it changes and we come to something that is more optimal. Another question I have is about, um, you've used the phrase India is not a single market, and you've explained eloquently why that is. There is another sense in which India is not a single market, and that's a different sort of depressing sense. So I thought I'll ask you about that as well. I had done an episode with Sajid Pai, the venture capitalist of Bloom Ventures, and he'd written a much talked about essay at one point, and we'll link it from the show notes. And again, forgive me if I don't remember the exact numbers, but they're ballpark. And his argument was that, look, when people think of the Indian market, it is so big. Actually, they're wrong. It's really small. And you have to think about what that market is. And he is not looking at region here, he's looking at income. And he's saying that there are about, I think, 1 to 2 crore people who are at the upper chunk, of which about 20 lakh, 30 lakh people are absolutely first world people. Behind that, there are another 10 crore you could broadly call middle class, who are like middle income countries. And behind that, you have 120, 130 million people who are sub-Saharan Africa, right? And sub-Saharan Africa is obviously not a market. And just to put it in context for those who are viewing us, our domestic helps, our drivers, etc., are in that second category of 10 crore people. Sub-Saharan Africa is much worse off. Sub-Saharan Africa is all the people who couldn't even have the means to emigrate to a big city in search of a job in the first place. So when you think about it, like income like this, there is also the sense that, a company sometimes make a mistake in terms of saying that, oh, it's a market of 1.4 billion. Actually, Sajid's pointed, it is not. Depending on your product, it might only be a market of 20 lakhs. So what are your thoughts on this sort of aspect of it?
So this is very much in play. If you start out at 1991, the market size was very small. I remember a little anecdote about Bank of America at the time, which at the time took more interest in India than they do today. But the entire aggregate Indian operations were like some tiny small state of the United States, because India was so poor that whatever you could do in India was more limited. And when that overall market size is limited, then there's not much space to do the complexities that I'm describing. But then as the market size grows, as the market for Kit Kat grows, as the market for Maggi noodles grows, as the market for home loans grows, as the market for vehicle loans grows, then the size pays for the fixed costs of modifying the firm. I will also turn around and say to the firm that what you think of as regions which work very badly for you is actually your blindness. Like you have failed to understand that market, and because you're doing one size fits all, you're failing to harness that market. So the idea that's running in my head is that suppose we calculate like a revenue per capita in each of the homogeneous regions of India, or the profit per capita for a firm in each of the regions of India. And if that's wildly diverse, to some extent, I'll turn around and blame the firm. I'll say, it's your job to make money. It's your job to understand the richness and diversity of India and figure out what product will I give some of the worst places, because there are human beings there and they have some disposable income, and your job is to serve them. And it requires getting off your high horse of saying, I know one product, I am here to roll it out all across this country. And so I look for the variability, the interquartile range of profit per person or profit per unit GDP or ROE of the firm across these geographically diverse units. And when you see very large numbers for that, it says something is going wrong in the firm. So, for example, I know some firms who really are in their comfort zone in playing South India, and they will mutter strange curses and say North India is some wasteland and I don't know how to operate there and I won't operate there. And the answer is, yeah, you could behave like that. But then you could turn around and say, let me hire some red-blooded North Indians and actually figure out how to play in the North Indian market, because there is some upside there and it is different. Your tidy, calm ways of operating in the South won't work there. But then your job is to figure out how. You can't just say, I'm fixed, I know what to do, and I'll keep on doing that and mutter vague curses at the difficulties of operating in the North.
Ajay Shah, everyone is red-blooded. Red-blooded North Indians is what? I did not expect this sad stereotyping from you. You mentioned interquartile GDP, you mentioned variability. It's time for some Bollywood.
Bollywood has done interquartile range.
Watch.
लेकिन करते करते पता चला कि बिजनेस में कोई चालाकी, कोई स्कीम, कोई जादू नहीं है। तो बस एक चीज, लोग जो आपके साथ काम करते, जो आपके कस्टमर, आपको तो कभी लोग दिखेंगे, आपको तो सिर्फ नंबर दिखे, किसने कितने नंबर अचीव किए, किसने कितने टारगेट्स तोड़े। मुझे तो स्कूल से नंबर नहीं समझ में आते थे, मुझे हमेशा लोग ही दिखे, कौन खुश है, कौन दुखी, कौन क्या काम अच्छा कर सकता है, किसको किस काम में मजा आता है। बाकी बात पता है क्या सर, जब लोग खुश होते हैं नंबर अपने आप बढ़ने लगते हैं, क्योंकि बिजनेस नंबर नहीं, बिजनेस लोग हैं, सिर्फ लोग।
So Amit, tell us, what are your recommendations for today?
So the book I'm going to recommend today is Desperately Seeking Shahrukh by Shrana Bhattacharya. And I had done an episode of The Seen and the Unseen with her, which is my most popular episode so far. It's called The Loneliness of the Indian Woman, which is really what I feel the title of the book should have been, because that's really what it's about. So I deliberately named it that. She uses Indian women's love for Shah Rukh, adoration for Shah Rukh, to kind of talk about what our society is like and how lonely our women are in a sense, and what the world is for them. And it's a book that contains multitudes in terms of, it's about economics, it's about sociology. It also has some beautiful writing. In my conversation with Shrana, I discovered the great memoirist Vivian Gonick. And she's also written some great books, so all of them are a recommendation as well. But yeah, that was a sort of a delightful episode for me, and a book that covers multitudes and that looks at all these deep truths about India using Bollywood as a lens. Kind of what we have been doing today. But I have a quiz question for you. The most popular episode of The Seen and the Unseen is, like I just said, The Loneliness of the Indian Woman. What is the second most popular?
I don't know.
The Loneliness of the Indian Man. That was an episode with Nikhil Taneja, more than 7-hour episode, also a classic. So, gentle reader, do check both of those out.
It should have been Lonely Reader.
Lonely Reader. So, I mean, these are a play on Alan Sillitoe's great novel, Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. And I had earlier done a play on it with an episode with Rajat Ubhekar. He wrote a book about trucking through India. So, the title of that episode was The Loneliness of the Long Distance Trucker. And then I did Indian Woman and Indian Man. And now I think I'm kind of done with it. And we're all lonely. So, that's life. So, Ajay, what would you like to recommend?
I have an odd recommendation for today. It is Jawaharlal Nehru's The Discovery of India. Okay, and I call it odd because, in a way, all of us have read this book in our childhood. It is one of the basic formative books of the country, and a book of everybody's childhood. I read it when I was 12 or something. And as the years go by, I actually woke up to the book slowly. Meaning it took me a long time to understand the book. It is actually a fundamental book. It is literally the book that invents the idea of India. And I went back as a grown-up and I read the book a couple of years ago, and it just really gets you. So I would recommend every adult that even if you read Discovery of India as a child, it's worth going back to it today.
And I would recommend every child read it now, and when you are an adult, come back to it. And is it true? I mean, I vaguely seem to remember, I don't know if it was this book or some other, that Nehru wrote it while he was in prison. So all the quotes and the book references and all are from memory.
No, he was political prisoners were treated well in
So he was
those
in Teen Murti
days.
Bhavan and all of that, yeah.
No, I mean, he was in jail, but he was given access to books. So there would be a rotating set of books that would come to him. But it is true, he had no library, no computer. He just had a couple of books on his desk, and his friends would be able to rotate books to him on that desk, and he was writing. Similarly, Glimpses of World History is his letters to Indira Gandhi. It is just done from memory.
He would have been a podcaster today.